This day in sports history. This episode is brought to you by the Sterling Soap Company. Sterling Soap is 100% natural and with a variety of bath soaps, shave soaps, beard balm, lotions, cologne, and many more personal care products in a large variety of scents, you're sure to find something that's perfect for you or that special someone in your life. Check them out at sterlingsoap.com. And welcome back to another edition of This Day in Sports History. I'm your host, Steve White. It is September 17th, and on this day over the years, we had a dramatic comeback in a battle of college football titans. There was an upset of epic proportions in the NFL, and a foolish pairing on the opening day of a Ryder Cup doomed the Americans to their worst defeat. Plus, a World Series champ had their title stripped, and a non-sports fun fact about an airport you might want to check out on your world travels. Stick around, it's going to be fun, and I guarantee you're going to learn something. But let's start with what happened on this day in 1988, when Jimmy Johnson took his Miami Hurricanes to the Big House to take on the Michigan Wolverines. The Hurricanes were riding a pretty substantial wave at this point. They were the defending national champs. The week before, they'd rolled the top-ranked and in-state rival Florida State 31-0 to take over the top spot in college football. And they had won 13 consecutive games. Michigan was stinging a bit. They were coming off of a subpar 4-loss 1987 season. The week before this meeting with the Hurricanes, they'd lost a close one at Notre Dame. They simply could not afford a second loss in the second week of the season. The Canes took an early lead in the second quarter, but Wolverine QB Michael Taylor threw a touchdown pass to close out the first half that gave Michigan the lead going into the locker room. The Canes had a pair of drives snuffed when Veda Murray played the tip drill to perfection in the third quarter and came up with 2 picks of Steve Walsh passes.
Michigan leads 20-14. Here's Gary, intercepted! The second ricochet for Veda Murray. Not Walsh's fault.
That second one led to a Mike Gillette field goal to make it a 9-point Wolverine lead. Michigan found the end zone again on their first drive in the fourth quarter.
Close to 13. Taylor's pass to the corner. Touchdown, Callaway!
Wolverines 30, Hurricanes 14 at that point, and things were looking pretty good in Ann Arbor. Midway through the fourth quarter, Miami finally got their offense moving again. A methodical drive down the field resulted in a touchdown pass from Walsh to Rob Chudzinski. After a 2-point conversion, the lead was now down to 8 with under 5.5 to play. Michigan just needed to run some clock. And the old Wolverines of the 70s would have just handed that ball off to their running back, picked up 4 or 5 yards a carry, and kept that clock moving. Instead, the 88 version of the Wolverines could not move the ball more than a few yards, and they couldn't convert a first down, and they had to punt it away. The previously methodical Miami became the Hurricanes, who score in a hurry.
It is Gary, first down at the 30, the 25, the 20, he's on his way. Touchdown, Miami!
But their second try for a 2-point conversion failed, and the Wolverines held on to the slim 2-point lead. But Miami pulled off a perfect onside kick and recovered in Michigan territory with 2:58 remaining. They now had the luxury of using some clock, and they moved down the field to set up Carlos Huerta for a 29-yard field goal. His aim was true, and Miami had stormed back, scoring 17 points in the final 5.5 minutes to lead 31-30. Michigan's attempt to put Gillette in field goal range was anemic, to say the least, and time ran out before they could cross midfield. It was the first time in 29 years that Michigan started the year with 2 losses. On this day in 1961, it was one of the greatest upsets in the NFL. The Minnesota Vikings were an expansion team in '61, and so, as a general rule, they're not supposed to be very good. The preseason and We've talked a lot about how the preseason back then differs from preseason games now, but suffice it to say that preseason games then were a little better predictor of how things would go during the season. One of the teams the Vikings played in the preseason that year was the Chicago Bears. The Bears won the preseason matchup 30-7. Just 2 weeks later, the Bears and Vikings kicked off their seasons against each other on this day. The Vikings were 29-point underdogs heading into this one, and despite head coach Norm Van Brocklin's midweek promise to rookie Fran Tarkenton that he was going to start at quarterback, he switched things up on Sunday and went instead with the veteran George Shaw. After the first quarter, though, things were not going very well for Minnesota, and Van Brocklin sent Tarkenton onto the field. He proceeded to put on a display that had not been seen by a rookie in his debut in the history of the game. Tarkenton threw 23 passes, completed 17 of them for 250 yards and 4 touchdowns. He also ran one in en route to the 37-13 win in their franchise opener. No rookie quarterback making their debut had ever thrown for 4 touchdowns in a game, and that would not be equaled until Marcus Mariota threw 4 touchdowns in his debut in 2015. On this day in 1933, a rule change went into effect that helped modernize pro football. Prior to 33, a quarterback attempting a forward pass had to be at least 5 yards behind the line of scrimmage. There were also less referees on the field at this point, so it was kind of tough to watch. But like a lot of rules changes, the updated version introduced and put into effect on this day came from controversy the year before. In the 1932 championship game between the Chicago Bears and the Portsmouth Spartans, Bronco Nagurski led his team down the field. They were knocking on the door of the end zone, but his first power run up the middle was stopped. On the next down, his run attempt was also stifled. On third down, he ran up to the line and then he backpedaled and threw a touchdown strike to Red Grange. The Spartans were vehement in their complaints, though, that Nagurski had been within the 5-yard zone. Those pleas went unheard, and the Bears won the title 9-0. Side note, the Portsmouth Spartans eventually became the Detroit Lions in 34. So this rule became known as the Bronco Nagurski rule, and it's the rule we have today that a legal forward pass must be made simply behind the line of scrimmage. In about 30 years, another quarterback would push the boundaries of the rules and lead to another change, and I'll talk about that one on the 19th. And since we're talking about throwing the football a whole bunch, how about what happened on this day in 1994 when UNLV's Jason Davis completed 28 of 41 passes for 347 yards? Now, that would be a pretty decent game, but Davis did all of that in just the fourth quarter. Now, let me read those stats again now that you know the context of those numbers. He completed 28 of 41 passes in a quarter. He threw the football 41 times in 15 minutes. So UNLV was playing the Idaho Vandals on this day, and the Rebels had gotten behind by a lot. They were down 45-10 heading into the final quarter, so they were desperate. Not much to do when you trail by 35 other than air it out, right? And they did. They were also helped out a good bit by Idaho's 3 lost fumbles on their first 3 possessions of the fourth quarter. Davis threw 4 touchdowns, 3 of those to his favorite target, Randy Gatewood. The running Rebels held the ball for 11 minutes out of the 15, but despite the offensive explosion, it was not enough. Idaho, who was playing as a 1AA team at this point, tacked on a field goal to win the game 48-38. Davis's numbers of 41 pass attempts, 28 completions, and 347 yards passing are still NCAA records for a quarter. Gatewood's 23 receptions on the day is still the record, but it's shared now. On this day in 2004, it was a disastrous start for the Americans in the Ryder Cup. The hole they dug on this day doomed them and led to their most lopsided loss a few days later. Hal Sutton takes a lot of heat for his decision as captain to pair up Tiger Woods and Phil Mickelson for the first time ever in a Ryder Cup. Now, on paper, putting the world's number 2 player, Tiger, and the world number 4 golfer, Phil, together seems like a powerhouse pairing, right? But as any good football or basketball coach might tell you, it's more about the chemistry on your team rather than the talent, right? And in 2004, these two did not like each other. Respect? Sure, they had a lot of respect for each other. Like? Not so much. They did not talk to each other, but they did talk about each other to friends and associates. Tiger called Mickelson Phony Phil due to how he pandered to galleries, and honestly, Phony Phil is not wrong. Now, whether bad chemistry was the reason that they got smoked on day one, who's to say? But they got off to a rough start in the morning's 4-ball match against Scotland's Colin Montgomery and Ireland's Padraig Harrington, who happened to be the world number 1 player at that point, and it did not get any better in the afternoon. Montgomery was a Ryder Cup veteran at this point, and he always seemed to rise to the moment. He had not missed a single session of a Ryder Cup since 1991. Montgomery and Harrington went on to win the morning match 2-1. Now, to be honest, it did have a lot more to do with how Monty and Padraig played. The match was close throughout. In the afternoon alternate shot format, Mickelson and Woods squared off against Darren Clarke and Lee Westwood. The American duo had an early lead, but they lost it, and when they came to the 18th, the match was all square. Mickelson's drive wound up next to a fence post, and it forced Tiger to take a penalty drop. That led to a double bogey, and the Euro duo rolled in a bogey putt to win the match 1-up. Tiger and Phil had been shut out. Of course, the other American teams on this day did not fare much better. They only managed a half in one of the matches and won only one of the afternoon matches. The score at the end of day 1 was a lopsided 6.5 to 1.5 in favor of the Euros. Now, how much can you draw from the data that when Tiger and Phil were split up on Saturday, they each won a point of the team's 3 points that day? When the dust settled on Sunday, the Europeans romped to their biggest ever margin of victory in a Ryder Cup, winning 18.5 to 9.5. And on this day in 1992, the Philippines Little League team that had recently won the Little League World Series had their title stripped for using ineligible players. The team that represented the Far East in the championship was supposed to be a team from Zamboanga City. This actually started months prior, after Zamboanga won the Philippines national title. 8 players from other teams were handpicked by the Filipino Baseball Association to replace the original players on the Zamboanga team, and they were obviously not from Zamboanga, and also the coach was replaced. This new team, virtually a Filipino all-star team, went to China and won the regional tournament. They then worked their way through the Little League World Series field and by August 29th had advanced to the championship game. It was seen as an inspirational story at the time. These kids from a poor and far-flung district had taken down mighty Japan, Taiwan, and Korea to make it to the States. Then they'd beaten Germany, Canada, and the Dominican Republic to make it to the final. The Filipino team then routed the American team from Long Beach, California, 15-4. But almost as soon as the celebration started, questions were being asked and an investigation began. Letters also began to come into an investigative journalist who was looking into the situation from family members of the displaced players asserting that the players on the team were not from the Zamboanga area and they weren't who they said they were. The added players had assumed the identities of the players they'd replaced. Even several of the parents who traveled to the U.S. were using false identities with the promise of money if they went along with the scam. Once the investigation was complete, the outcome of the game was changed to a 6-0 forfeit in favor of the U.S. Larry Lewis, manager of the Long Beach team, said, "We would rather have won the championship on the field rather than in a conference room. We were deprived of the opportunity to do that, and now we'll never have that opportunity." And time now for today's That's Got Nothing to Do with Sports fun fact. If flying causes you stress, well, you should book your next flight out of Cincinnati, Northern Kentucky International Airport. Twice a month, miniature horses are brought in to calm the nerves of anxious flyers. This has been an original Thrive Suite production.